The rain had stopped only moments before Clarissa Duval stepped out onto the marble veranda, but the air still clung to her skin with the dampness of the late afternoon storm. Her estate, a sprawling monument of pale stone and glass, stood in silent contrast to the restless city below. From here, she could see the jagged skyline rising beyond the manicured gardens. But her gaze was not on the view. It was fixed on the narrow servants' path that curved behind the guest house, the path her maid had taken only minutes earlier. Clarissa was not a woman prone to idle suspicion. She had built her fortune from nothing, had weathered the betrayals of former business partners, and had stared down the predatory grins of men who underestimated her. Trust, once given, was a currency she valued more than gold. But that trust was not infinite. For weeks, small things had begun to vanish from her home. At first, it was easy to dismiss: a silk scarf misplaced, a bottle of perfume gone from her vanity. She had told herself it was a disarray of her own busy schedule, the scatter of a mind too occupied with charity galas, board meetings, and her son's upcoming university applications. Yet the unease had rooted itself in her chest and grown. Today, the root split wide open. In the center of her dressing table sat a velvet box that had belonged to her grandmother. The morning before, it had held a necklace of white pearls, each one round and flawless, strung together with a clasp of emerald and gold. This afternoon, when Clarissa opened the box to ready herself for a meeting, it lay empty. Her mind had immediately drawn a straight line between the loss and the one person with constant, quiet access to her private rooms: Lila, the young maid she had hired 2 years ago. Lila had seemed, at first, the perfect choice. Discreet, industrious, with a presence so unassuming that she often moved through the household like a shadow. Clarissa had learned little of her personal life. The maid rarely spoke of it, and Clarissa rarely asked. She considered herself a fair employer, but not a friend. There were boundaries in place, unspoken yet understood. Now, those boundaries seemed fragile. Clarissa remembered the flicker of hesitation in Lila's eyes earlier that day when asked to fetch tea. The way her hands had trembled slightly as she set the silver tray down. She had noticed, too, how Lila's gaze lingered for a fraction longer on the dresser before she turned away. That fraction of a second was all it took for Clarissa's mind to assemble a story. The missing pearls, the shifting behavior, the sudden secrecy she sensed in the maid's movements. Her thoughts were interrupted by the faint sound of footsteps on gravel. She turned toward the servants' path once more. In the fading light, she saw Lila walking briskly, her coat pulled tight despite the humidity. Under her arm, she carried a small, worn leather satchel, one Clarissa had never seen before. The image was sharp, almost cinematic: the departing figure, the satchel, the empty velvet box upstairs. A breeze swept across the veranda, carrying with it the mingled scent of wet earth and distant lilacs. Clarissa inhaled deeply, as though scent alone might steady her resolve. She could not afford hesitation now. This was not merely about a necklace. It was about principle, about the sanctity of trust within her household. A theft from her home was not just a crime. It was a personal violation. And if it was Lila, Clarissa intended to confront her before the truth slipped away into the night. She straightened her shoulders, the decision settling over her like armor. The pearls were gone. The evidence, or what she believed to be evidence, pointed in one direction. As Lila disappeared beyond the curve of the garden wall, Clarissa stepped down from the veranda, her heels clicking sharply against the stone. By the time she reached the narrow path, the sky had darkened, the first stars emerging faintly above the treetops. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The air felt thicker here, as though the estate itself was holding its breath. Clarissa followed, each step deliberate. She could feel the moment tightening around her, pulling her forward toward a confrontation that seemed both inevitable and irreversible. She told herself this was justice, swift, necessary, and without sentiment. But a smaller, quieter voice at the back of her mind whispered questions she chose not to hear. Not yet, because first she had to catch up to Lila. Clarissa quickened her pace along the servants' path, the low crunch of gravel beneath her heels loud in the otherwise muffled evening. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and rain-soaked stone. Beyond the hedge, she could see the faint glow of the staff quarters, a row of small, utilitarian buildings tucked discreetly at the edge of the property. Lila reached the door of the last unit and paused, fumbling with a key, her head turned slightly, as though she had heard Clarissa approaching. The lamplight spilling from a nearby post caught her face, not startled, but guarded, her lips pressed into a thin, unreadable line. "Lila," Clarissa called, her voice sharper than intended. The maid froze, hand still on the key. Slowly, she turned to face her employer. "Yes, madam." The tone was even, polite, but there was something in her eyes, an alertness, a readiness to flee if the wrong words were spoken. Clarissa stopped a few paces away, the space between them charged with an unspoken challenge. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" Her gaze flicked to the worn leather satchel clutched under Lila's arm. Lila's fingers tightened around the strap. "Just into town." "At this hour?" Clarissa let the question hang, heavy with suspicion. "What's in the bag?" The young woman's posture stiffened, but her expression remained calm. "Personal things." Clarissa's eyes narrowed. "Open it." For a moment, the only sound was the wind threading through the trees. Lila's knuckles whitened on the satchel. "It's private." "That," Clarissa said, taking a deliberate step forward, "is not the answer of someone who works in my home and respects my trust. I'm missing something very valuable, and you seem eager to be elsewhere." The words landed like stones between them. Lila's breath caught, so subtle it might have been imagined, but she didn't step back. "If you think I've taken something, you should say it plainly, madam." "I am saying it plainly," Clarissa replied, her voice low and unwavering. "My grandmother's pearls are gone, and I believe they're with you." Lila blinked, the faintest crease forming between her brows. She said nothing at first, and the silence stretched until it was almost unbearable. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she unbuckled the satchel and set it on the ground. Clarissa braced herself for the glint of emerald and gold. But when Lila opened the bag, the contents were not what she had expected. Inside were a neatly folded dress, a small stack of letters tied with string, and a half-empty packet of biscuits. On top lay a worn photograph of a young boy with wide, dark eyes. Clarissa's brows knit together. "What is this?" "My brother," Lila said quietly, touching the photograph with a reverence that softened her entire demeanor. "He's sick. I was going to town to sell something to pay for his medicine." The words cut through Clarissa's anger, but not her doubt. "Sell something?" "From my house." Lila met her gaze, steady, unflinching. "No, madam. For my own things. The pearls, I haven't seen them." The denial was simple, but it was a weight Clarissa couldn't immediately dismantle. Her certainty faltered, just enough for the cold edge of hesitation to slip in. The lamplight trembled in the evening breeze, shadows shifting across Lila's face. Clarissa felt the night pressing closer, the path behind her suddenly longer, darker. She wasn't ready to admit she might be wrong, but for the first time, the possibility entered her mind. Still, she said nothing. Not yet. By morning, the estate was no longer a quiet place. Word of the missing pearls had traveled quickly, like water seeping through cracks in stone. Clarissa had not told anyone outright, at least not beyond a terse conversation with her head housekeeper. But in households like hers, silence was fragile. In the breakfast room, the silver service clinked faintly as coffee was poured. The two footmen avoided Clarissa's gaze, moving with an exaggerated care that only drew more attention to their unease. Beyond the tall windows, gardeners trimmed hedges with methodical precision, but their heads bent together in hushed conversation. Even her son, Daniel, seemed aware that something was amiss. He appeared in the doorway halfway through her coffee, hair still damp from the shower. "Is it true?" he asked. Clarissa set her cup down, porcelain tapping lightly against the saucer. "Is what true? That you think Lila stole from you?" His voice carried the bluntness of youth, unsoftened, unfiltered. The question struck with more force than she expected. "I'm handling it," she said, each word carefully measured. Daniel didn't look convinced. "She's been nothing but nice to me. She helped with my college essay when you were in New York. If she says she didn't do it." He let the sentence trail off, but the implication lingered between them like smoke. By mid-morning, the first call came. It was Meredith Chase, an old acquaintance whose talent for social climbing was matched only by her appetite for scandal. "Darling, I simply must ask," Meredith began, her voice dripping with the false sympathy of someone who intended to dine out on the story later. "Is it true your maid's been caught pilfering? I heard it from Fiona, and you know Fiona has that dreadful cousin on the council." Clarissa ended the call before Meredith could finish, but the damage was already done. At noon, her housekeeper appeared in the doorway, her normally impassive face lined with discomfort. "Mrs. Duval," she began, "the staff are uneasy. Some think the police will be called. Lila hasn't come in since last night." Clarissa's stomach tightened. She had half expected Lila to appear for her duties, ready to face whatever came next. But her absence now carried a heavier weight. Absence could be guilt, but it could also be fear. In the afternoon, as the sun shifted across the marble floors, Clarissa found herself pacing her study. The velvet box still sat on her desk, its emptiness a constant reminder. She replayed the previous night in her mind. The satchel, the photograph, the denial, the way Lila's eyes had not flinched when accused. She wanted certainty, the kind that could be wrapped neatly and delivered like a verdict. But instead she had only the murmur of servants in the hall, the half-truths whispered over phone lines, the unspoken questions in her own mind. The estate, once her fortress, now felt like a stage where everyone played a part: the loyal employer, the wronged mistress, the guilty maid. Yet beneath that script, something else was moving, something she could not yet name. As the evening shadows lengthened, Clarissa stood at the tall window, watching the servant's path where it curved into darkness. Somewhere beyond it, Lila was keeping her silence, and in that silence, Clarissa felt the weight of an answer she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Clarissa had always prided herself on her ability to get to the root of a problem. Business negotiations, charity politics, family disputes. She had a knack for cutting through the noise. But this was different. This wasn't a contract to read or a competitor to outmaneuver. This was personal, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. By the next morning, the estate felt smaller, as if the walls themselves were bending inward. She abandoned her breakfast untouched and went straight to the staff wing. The hallway smelled faintly of lavender polish and old wood. She rapped on Lila's door once, twice. No answer. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Wentworth, appeared at the far end of the hall, her hands clasped like she'd been waiting. "She hasn't been here since she left last night," she said quietly. "No one's seen her." Clarissa stepped inside the small room anyway. It was neat, almost too neat, as though the occupant had tried to erase herself. The narrow bed was made with hospital corners. The wardrobe stood open, revealing only a handful of plain dresses on hangers. On the nightstand, a chipped porcelain mug sat beside a small stack of library books, all neatly aligned. She scanned the room for anything out of place. Her eyes landed on a folded scrap of paper tucked under the edge of the mug. Pulling it free, she found a hastily written list. Bus ticket, medicine, send money. Beside medicine, the name of a pharmacy in the city had been scrawled. Clarissa's pulse quickened. The list could be proof of an innocent errand or a cover for something else entirely. She left the estate shortly after, the driver glancing at her in the rearview mirror but asking no questions. The city was a restless sprawl of traffic and noise, its streets wet from an early shower. The pharmacy was small, wedged between a bakery and a locksmith. A bell tinkled as she stepped inside. The pharmacist, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone," Clarissa said, lowering her voice. "Young woman works in my home. She may have come in yesterday evening." He hesitated, glancing toward a back room. "If you mean the girl with the dark hair, yes. She bought medicine. Paid in cash. Didn't have enough at first, so she—" He trailed off. "So she what?" The man sighed. "She gave me a ring to cover the difference. Said it belonged to her mother. I told her it was too much, but she insisted. A ring, not pearls, but enough to knock Clarissa's stomach with something dangerously close to guilt. Do you still have it?" He nodded, disappearing into the back before returning with a small box. Inside lay a modest silver band set with a pale stone. No emerald, no gold, no sign of her grandmother's necklace. Clarissa closed the box gently. Her certainty was beginning to crumble. Lila hadn't been pawning stolen finery. She had been bargaining with her own possessions for someone else's sake. Outside, the air smelled of warm bread from the bakery next door, but Clarissa barely noticed. She stood on the pavement, the city moving around her, and for the first time she wondered if she had mistaken loyalty for guilt, silence for deceit. The bus station was only a few blocks away. Without fully deciding, she began walking toward it. Somewhere out there, Lila was still moving through the city, and Clarissa intended to find her. Clarissa spotted Lila at the far end of the bus station, sitting on a bench with her satchel in her lap. The place was loud, engines rumbling, voices echoing, the smell of diesel and coffee drifting through the air, but Lila seemed untouched by the chaos, her gaze fixed on the floor. Clarissa approached slowly, the heels of her shoes clicking against the concrete. Lila looked up at the sound, and for a fleeting moment, something unreadable passed across her face. Surprise, weariness, and perhaps the faintest trace of defiance. "I need to speak with you," Clarissa said, stopping just short of the bench. Lila's fingers tightened around the satchel strap, but she nodded. "I have a bus in 20 minutes. This won't take that long." They moved to a quieter corner near the ticket windows. Clarissa opened her handbag and placed a silver ring from a pharmacist on the table between them. "I went looking for you. I found this." Lila's gaze softened at the sight of it. She reached out and brushed her thumb over the stone. "It was my mother's. I swore I'd never sell it." But when the pharmacist said the medicine cost more than I had, her voice trailed off, but the rest didn't need saying. Clarissa leaned forward. "You told me last night you hadn't seen the pearls. Was that true?" "Yes." Lila met her eyes directly, no hesitation. "I didn't take them. I wouldn't." Clarissa searched her face for the flicker of deceit she'd expected to find. Instead, she found something steadier, tiredness, yes, but also an unshakable dignity. "My brother's been sick for months," Lila continued. "The doctor said without treatment She stopped, swallowing hard. "I tried to save enough for my wages, but it wasn't enough. I thought if I could just buy him the medicine this week, he might have a chance." Clarissa sat back, the words settling in her chest like a slow, heavy weight. For days she had carried her certainty like a shield, protecting herself from doubt. Now that certainty felt brittle, a thing too easily cracked. "I thought I was protecting my home," she said quietly. "But maybe I was only protecting my pride." Lila said nothing, but the faintest tremor passed through her shoulders. She looked both relieved and uncertain, as though the moment had taken something out of her. Clarissa exhaled, long and slow. "The pearls? I'll find them, but not at the cost of someone else's honor." A muffled announcement called passengers for a departing bus. Lila glanced toward the gate, then back at Clarissa. "I have to go. My brother's waiting." Clarissa hesitated, then reached into her purse and drew out a folded envelope for the medicine and for whatever else he needs. Lila's eyes widened. "I can't take this." "Yes, you can," Clarissa said, pressing it into her hands. "Because I owe you more than an apology." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Lila nodded, gripping the envelope tightly. "Thank you, madam." As Clarissa watched her walk toward the bus, the satchel swinging gently at her side, she realized the pearls had lost some of their hold on her. What she'd gained in this moment was harder to name, but infinitely harder to lose. 2 weeks later, the pearls were found. They had slipped behind a false panel in Clarissa's dressing table, likely dislodged during a recent repair. The discovery came not with triumph, but with a quiet, almost embarrassed relief. She had them cleaned and placed back into their velvet box, though she could not bring herself to wear them again. The story of the theft had already faded from the whispers of her acquaintances. Meredith Chase had moved on to another scandal. The staff spoke of the incident rarely and only in passing. But for Clarissa, the memory remained sharp, not because of the missing necklace, but because of the moment she had nearly destroyed someone's dignity with nothing more than suspicion. One bright afternoon, She sat on the veranda again, the garden stretching green and endless before her. A letter lay open on the table beside her tea. It was from Lila. The handwriting was neat but unpolished, the words plain and without ornament. Madam, my brother is better now. The medicine worked faster than the doctor expected. He asked me to thank you, though I told him you didn't owe us anything. I've found work closer to home, so I can take care of him. I will never forget the day you came to the station, and I hope you will not forget that I told you the truth. Lila. Clarissa read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it inside the velvet box with the pearls. It felt fitting that they should rest together, a reminder that value is measured not only in what can be locked away, but in what one chooses to trust. When Daniel joined her on the veranda, she handed him the box. One day, these will be yours, she said. But remember, they're just stones and gold. What matters is the story they carry. He smiled faintly, perhaps not yet understanding. But one day, she thought he would. The afternoon light warmed her face as she looked over the gardens, the servant's path winding beyond the hedge. Somewhere out there, Lila was living her life, caring for her brother, untouched by the gossip that had once threatened her. Clarissa sipped her tea, the steam curling upward like a promise. The pearls were safe, the truth was known, and she had learned, painfully but completely, that trust once broken could be mended if one was willing to listen before judging, and that, she decided, was worth far more than anything locked in a velvet box.